I have a series of different archetypal hand shapes that I've identified. And if I had seen your handprint, Jena, if you left your handprint on a Mayan cave wall 1,000 years ago, or a French cave wall 14,000 or 34,000 years ago, just by looking at your hand shape, I would know which archetype you belong to, whether you were a decoder, whether you were a tortured poetess, whether you were an alpha male. I wouldn't know what was going on in your life, but I would know what you would like to have going on in your life. I would know, all things being equal, what you'd be up to. If you were a philosopher, you would be reading, writing, and teaching. That's what philosophers like to do. But then again, if this was 34,000 years ago, maybe there wasn't any jobs for philosophers. Maybe you were like working in the fields. I don't know the events of your life, but I know where you would be most comfortable. And of course, even 34,000 years ago, there were people who were talking to others and teaching them things. Maybe that person was one of the teachers in that society. We'll never know. So to put together my archetype system, I've taken pieces, I've cherry-picked from 3 different hand shape systems. And I've read 3 times as many hand shape systems in palmistry books. I've read everything in English, in palmistry books about different hand shape systems, and I've tried out what I've read. I would take an author and outline what they said and carry around their book with my notes for months at a time, trying to apply their system to the hands I was seeing. And 3 systems stood out as the ones with the most useful typology. One was the system of d'Arpigné from 1830, and this is a traditional palmistry book system. For the next 125, 145 years, almost every palmistry book had a picture of d'Arpigné's 7 types. So when I started reading hands in the late 60s, I came across his typology, tried to find examples, living examples of his types, and gave up. They weren't around. I couldn't find them. I figured I was doing a bad job. Now, as I look back, I could see that those types don't look like they did 200 years ago. The types that d'Arpigné was seeing, he was living in a different world. Those hands have morphed into slightly different shapes. But the typology that he used is still useful if we can identify them properly. 75 years after d'Arpigné, we have Benham. Benham wrote The Laws of Scientific Handwriting, a 600-plus page book, a treatise on handwriting, and one of the best books ever written on handwriting, even though it's way out of date. And many of the things he said do not bear scrutiny over time. But he's the first hand reader after d'Arpigné not to use a hand shape system. He didn't like d'Arpigné's system. He introduced a different system based upon which finger type you were, Jupiter, Saturn, you were an Apollo type, a Mercury type, or the parts of the palm, a Venusian, a Martian, or a Lunarian type. So he had 7 different types. d'Arpigné also had 7 types. And I find his classification system, Benham's, useful but incomplete. The same as d'Arpigné, useful but incomplete. And then the third typology that I like is from Gettings. Gettings is only in the 60s and 70s, so he's in the last half century, and he is an astrologer, so it was natural for him to look at hands and declare this is an earthy hand, this is a fiery hand, water and air, 4 basic archetypes. And probably his hand-shaped system is the easiest and most useful for the client. But again, incomplete. I look at many hands and I still can't tell if it's more earth, more fire, more air, more water. It's such a mishmash. But I'll tell you, when I have all 3 systems available to me and I look at hands, I can usually pick from those 3 different systems a clear-cut hand type. And then I can look for a secondary element. And when I put them together, when I blend the different systems together, I get very tight archetypal explanations for my clients. So I'll find an earthy hand that's from Giddings with a dominant Jupiter that's from Benham, and we have my master of my domain archetype. Or I'll find a water hand, again, earth, air, fire, water from Giddings, with a dominant Saturn from the Benham system, and we have the poetess, the musician, the archetype that you and I discussed in our last interview. And it's blending the archetypes together and triangulating with other markers in the hand and marching that over to the fingerprints. This is the basic outline of what I do in pretty much every reading, and it allows me to get ridiculously specific about the possibilities for a person. Just absolutely spot on, ridiculously exact. And so many of the hand readers that have gotten good at hand reading, they know the fingerprints well. They can spot the basic systems of hand shape. They can identify the gift markings and others, and they do a great job with their clients. Can be so much more specific, so much more precise and exact, especially with career options, if they can use the complex or the merged hand shapes, the ones that you and I have been discussing in interviews over the last couple of years.